I was going to say, among the many, many, many stupid things I've done in my life, which is a whole sermon in itself. When I was in high school, I wasn't a hunter. My dad was not a hunter. My grandfather was not a hunter, just nobody around us. But I had a friend who wanted to take me hunting one day out in California. And because I was stupid, I went with him. And it wasn't hunting Bambi or something easy like that by comparison. No, my friend wanted to find snakes. And Pacific diamondback rattlers are among the bigger rattlesnakes in the country. And we were going to go out and find them. Well, I figured this is a wise thing to do. I was a sophomore, put them out together there. And he had a bow and arrow, and I had a Bowie knife. So this just got better by the moment. And we go out there, and I figure what I know about snakes. Well, the rattlers make a lot of noise, so we'll have a clue. But they don't always make noise. I didn't realize that. And we stepped into a nest out in the middle of a field. And there was apparently the male, and it took off. And there was a couple hundred, it seemed like that to us, but lots of little babies all over the place. And then it must have been the female stayed there and tried to defend the nest. And my friend pinned this thing to the ground with his bow. And I was deeply impressed and petrified all at the exact same moment. And I watched him cut the head off and slice the thing in half. And it's, I'm a boy. This was pretty cool looking, seeing the heart still beating and all this kind of stuff. But you look back years later and say, what a moron. What was I doing? Why do you play with snakes? It's not something to play with. But for whatever reason, as you can ask my wife, I've always had this fascination for snakes. And I bought a snake the first night we dated. Put it in a box in the back seat. She didn't know what it was. She kept asking. The snake kept hitting against the box. And I said, oh, it's nothing. Don't worry about it. And I finally told her what it was, and she screamed and tried to get out of the car. I don't know how I got a second date out of that, but nevertheless, that was some of her stupider things she's ever done. But I've had a fascination for snakes, and so I thought we'd start this morning by looking at the father of lies, a real snake. And for whatever reason, Christians want to play with this one. I can't imagine. Because although sometimes you hear the hiss, sometimes you hear the rattle, a lot of times you don't until you're in the middle of it. And what we have a picture of and why I'm speaking about this morning, hopefully you'll see in a little bit. But I want you to see what the snake said. Chapter 3 of Genesis, verse 1 and following. Now the serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, indeed, as God said, you shall not eat from any tree in the garden. The woman said to the serpent, from the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat, but from the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat from it or touch it, or you will die. The serpent said to the woman, you will surely not die. For God knows in the day you eat from it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. And we all know the outcome of that little meal. The fascinating thing is to see the Friends of the Snake Club go on forever and ever. You can find the New Age in these quotes from the snake. You can find Hindu and Buddhist teaching. You can find Wiccan teaching, the religion of witchcraft. You can find all sorts of stuff. What's most amazing to me, and I've talked about these things when I've come here before, but one of the most amazing things to me is to see Christians echoing the snake, and echoing the snake rather dramatically. What was almost unthinkable even 10 years ago for Christians to say is pretty much becoming normative now. It's absolutely stunning how fast this has happened, how rapidly this has happened. Let me give you some examples of this. 160, 170 years ago, when what we call Christian liberalism was really getting its birth in Germany and starting to sweep out, the heart of the Reformation had pretty much abandoned the faith. And you had an entire movement amongst the seminaries and the leading churches and theologians who were basically just taking on the Bible and saying, this is fairy tales. But they're important fairy tales. So we're going to still call ourselves Lutheran, but we don't really believe that any of these things happened. And by the time you get to, say, the World War II, there's a famous quote from Rudolf Bultmann, who is considered one of the great theologians of the 20th century. And he says, anybody who holds a transistor radio in his hand can no longer believe in the worldview of the Bible. You can't believe in miracles and take these stories seriously. But he was a serious churchman. He was a pastor, worked as a theologian at a seminary, this type of stuff. Invited over here to speak in our churches and our seminaries. It was a very head-on attack. The Bible is full of fairy tales. Everybody with a brain knows it. Just accept it and we'll go on. And pretty much most of the mission agencies and the big worldwide church organizations have pretty much capitulated. But one thing was surprising about that and kind of disappointing from their point of view is that the evangelical faith didn't die. They tried to kill it and it didn't. And you had huge splits, especially in America, not so much in Europe. Europe pretty much rolled over. But in American churches and stuff, you had huge splits. And many of the denominations, including in some respects Calvary Chapel, are a reflection of that. I was a conservative Baptist for 9 years. They are a reflection of that, of God bringing up new things once the old ones had died spiritually. And so you had, I'll just give you a quick story, the conservative Baptists. You had 100 years ago Northern Baptists and a Southern Baptist. You had the Northern Baptist Seminary was turning out missionaries that didn't believe you needed to believe in Jesus, that didn't believe in the virgin birth, that didn't believe in the resurrection of Jesus, this type of stuff. And some of the churches are sitting out there saying, we're putting our money into these mission agencies and they don't believe anything. And that really started a split amongst the Baptists, the Northern Baptists, and the conservative Baptists came out of that. Basically saying, why should we support missionaries that don't believe in the gospel? Kind of that's not a hard question, is it? So you can see these denominations dying, but you can see God raising up new things to take their place. So evangelicalism didn't die. And with the revival of the religious right, as many reporters talk about it in this country, the evangelical faith seemed to be going all over the place. But things have happened in the last 25, 27, 30 years. 1980, Time magazine declared the year of the evangelical. We supposedly had an evangelical president, Jimmy Carter, not evangelical by any definition, but he talked that way. We had many different religious leaders all over the place talking about a return to biblical faith, talking about holding on to these ideas that have been dismissed so often. We had the intelligent design movement starting to be reborn, the creationist movement starting to come back in different ways, people starting to take the Bible seriously. And that has been exciting as well, but things have started to change pretty dramatically. Even schools that were calling themselves evangelical 20 years ago started to change in all sorts of significant ways. And part of that is with what I'm about to talk about, the emerging church and the church growth movement. Two things that I've mentioned here before, I know, but they got married last year. I might have said that when I preached here last year, but their marriage basically means that the dominant wings of what's called evangelicalism in America pretty much have taken on the fact that they don't accept God's word for what it is. They don't believe in it. Some of you read Purpose Driven Life 10 years ago, thought it was a great book. Rick Warren is a different person than he was 10 years ago. And I'll illustrate some of this as we go through this. One of the times when I want to drive my kids crazy, I watch black and white movies. If you watch an older movie with today's kids, they just try to find something else to do real fast. And one of my favorite old movies is called Sergeant York. Some of you might remember it's about our most famous hero from World War I, starred Gary Cooper. And as the story goes, Gary Cooper single-handedly captured thousands of Germans. He didn't. But he captured quite a few. And what happened is they ran into this hill that had machine gun posts up in the front. And to do a straight-on charge was suicide. And unlike the Japanese or the Muslims, most American soldiers don't like suicide as an option. They'd rather kill the other guys and get away. So they're basically pinned down, don't know what to do. And Gary Cooper, as Alvin York, basically did what's called flanking. And that's what every military unit in history tries to do, is get around to the side of them where they're not prepared to receive an attack and then attack. And so he gets around the side and literally just picking them off from the side angle. And they didn't even see him there. And he just kept killing them one after another. In fact, after a while, they're realizing we can't even stop this, and they surrender. So he basically single-handedly takes on quite a large number of men, and this legend grew out of that. Well, in a sense, this is the analogy I want to make with this. Liberal Christianity, quote unquote, attacked the faith straight on, hit us hard, major hit. And we watched Christian institutions just fade right and left. Former Christian schools just drop out. Princeton University, for example, used to be a dramatically Christian school. But I have a dear friend that went to Princeton several years ago to the Divinity School. His first chapel was led by witches. I would say Princeton's not what they were 100 years ago. What do you think? That straight-on attack was a hard one and hurt. But the evangelical faith, and he survived and even rebounded. But today things are different. The attack hasn't come on. The liberals are still saying what they say. That's what they do. But the attack now has come on a flanking move, a move that we weren't prepared for. People that called themselves evangelicals, people that said they believed in God's word, and yet they've attacked the faith dramatically. Let me give you just some graphic examples of this. About 8 years ago, an evangelical group called Leadership put together a group of, quote, emerging leadership, quote unquote. This is in 2000. They put together a group of pastors and thinkers from around the country they thought were really on the cutting edge of how to minister today. And this included people like Rob Bell and Doug Paget and Tony Jones and Brian McLaren. And if you deal at all, and if you go to any Christian bookstore or half the schools out there, you'll see these names repeatedly. If you want to quote Time Magazine and see these are the top 25 of influential Christians, all this kind of stuff. These are happening people, all right? So you see these guys, and all of a sudden you see Christianity Today start quoting these guys favorably, and you see Baker Bookhouse, and you see Erdman's, and all these different huge Christian publishing houses that have been evangelical for so long, and all of a sudden they're publishing books by Mormons, and they're publishing books by open theists who don't believe God knows the future, and they're publishing books by Brian McLaren and all these others. And we're really stunned. Brian McLaren comes out with a book called A Generous Orthodoxy, which sounds so good. He's basically saying, hey, look, let's not quibble about the difference between Calvinist and Arminian, or the difference between amill or premill or charismatic and non-charismatic. Let's just all deal with it. God loves us, and that's fine, and let's just not fight over the details. That's a simple way to summarize that book. And it was very controversial the way he was saying it. He's talking about a new kind of Christian, another one of his books. He's putting out a book almost every 6 months, it seems like. And things were dramatically different. And a lot of people were really excited about it. A lot of people didn't like church as it had been in America. They wanted something new. They wanted something hot, something that would make an impact. And Brian McLaren seemed to lead the charge for that. Well, let's just look at all of this kind of stuff. Tell me you can't hear the snake hiss when you hear some of the things I'm about to tell you. Rob Bell, who spoke at Willow Creek many times before he got famous, whose Pneuma videos are all over the country and even here, who has been accepted in all sorts of places. Let you hear what he said in Velvet Elvis, his first big book. Came out just 6 or 7 years ago. He basically makes the quote, this is almost word for word, what does it matter if Mary was a virgin when she had Jesus? And after he asks that question, he says, does it really matter to our faith at all? And he puts it out as a hypothetical, but I don't really think he means it as a hypothetical. But notice the comparison with what the snake told Eve. Has God really said? Well, what if the virgin birth didn't happen? What if it really wasn't true? What does that mean to our faith? And Bell comes to the conclusion, nothing. Doesn't matter to us at all. We can go on doing what Jesus has called us to do, even if this story isn't true. This isn't a side issue. This isn't about whether we believe in the cessation of the gifts or believe in tongues. This isn't whether we believe the rapture happens before this or after that. This is something at the heart of the entire story, is the belief that Jesus was born of a virgin. Something predicted in the Old Testament, something talked about at the beginning of the New Testament. The Gospels record this, and he's basically saying it does not matter to our Christian faith. It doesn't matter what God tells us, and we're going to see about what he says about what God tells us or not in just a second here. But it doesn't matter that it says that whole thing. So Mark Driscoll, who interestingly enough was inside that movement, was part of that emerging thing. And as he started to see some, and I don't endorse everything Mark does, but as he comes out of that whole thing and realizes what's going on in there and just how bad it was getting. And he has a rather rude way of saying this, and that's kind of his calling card, is his rudeness. Whereas I'm such a sweet, nice person that I normally don't talk this way, but Mark just says, really? Is that the case, Rob? So you're telling me it doesn't matter if our faith was basically started on a story of a lying slut. And that one grabbed me. That's a little cruder than I think he maybe could have said it, but he really got the point across, didn't he? Does it matter if Mary was telling the truth? Or for that matter, John or Peter or James or Matthew or any of the other people that met? Does it matter? Does it change our Christian faith? And for Rob Bell, the answer was, no, not really. It's irrelevant to our Christian faith. Because as you discover from reading Rob, the Word of God's really not the Word of God. It's stories. It's fairy tales. It's myths. Oh, they're important ones. And all of a sudden I'm hearing the Jesus Seminar, Marcus Borg and John Shelby Spong and John Dominic Cressant and other people who hate God's Word. And I'm saying, oh, they're just Rudolph Bolton on over again. They're just all the old liberals coming back in new clothes. The Bible's fairy tales, but important fairy tales. Fairy tales you should hold on to, but not necessarily believe or take seriously. Why, thank you, Rob. God's answer, or Rob Bell's answer to what the snake says? No, God didn't really say those things. Nothing to take seriously. Brian McLaren comes out in A New Kind of Christian talking about being epistemically humble. That's a way of saying that, don't get lost in epistemics, just a way of saying we don't really know what we think we know. And I don't like when preachers talk about certainty. He made a big deal out of that he hates to hear radio preachers or TV preachers talk about how certain they are about things, like we can really know stuff. So the question of epistemology is, how do we know what we know? And he says, I want to be epistemically humble. I don't want to say that I know anything. In fact, to say I know stuff is the enemy of faith. According to Brian, faith is believing in something you don't know. And the more uncertain, the better you're off. And that's really back to Soren Kierkegaard and some other failed thinkers. But the interesting thing about this is Brian's own change. From a new kind of Christian and a generous orthodoxy where we're being humble and all this kind of stuff, we get to the shift movement, which came out this last 2 years. And his newest book, Everything Must Change. Now, I don't know about you, the humility just drips off that one. Everything must change? Thus speaks Brian? Wow, the authority there, Brian. I'm impressed. You've gone from such a humble person to somebody who seems very certain. I don't know about you, but everything must change seems like a rather strong statement. It seems like he's gone from epistemological humility to a mountaintop where he can see better than all the rest. Everything must change. Well, he talks about how we look at the Bible now. We must reframe, that's his words of saying, reframe the scripture and the story. What does he mean by that? That sounds so technical and the jargon seems to lose us. Well, here's what he means. We've had the Bible interpreted for us by these old-time Christians, that would be us, who took the stories at face value, who believed in the literal accounts, and that has led us to a bad place. So what do we need to do? We need to recast or reimagine the story. Well, what does that look like? Well, in the shift and in Everything Must Change, you find out that what Jesus really wants us to care about is not about the atonement, not about the fact that he died for our sins, not about any of these kind of old-fashioned Christian ideas. What Jesus is really concerned about is global warming. What Jesus is really disturbed about is social justice. What Jesus is really concerned about is redistribution of wealth. Does that not sound like our last political campaign? That's exactly how Brian McLaren was pushing it. And he was one of Obama's advisors, by the way. So Jesus doesn't care about sin. Jesus doesn't care about the atonement. Jesus cares about being a socially acceptable eco-warrior, who's basically a green gay Marxist. I don't know how else to put this. That's the new Jesus. We can recast him in that way because, after all, we're reframing the story. Remember, this is the guy that Christianity Today says, and Time Magazine, and Newsweek, and all these different outlets tell us is the number one read Christian in the country right now besides Rick Warren. Although something's even more interesting about this, Brian's going farther. Brian is now not only is he denying, virtually all the New Testament, but he's come to call Jesus, that we believe in, that the Bible talks about, his nickname now is the jihadi Jesus. What an interesting analogy that is, Brian. So our version of Jesus is somehow equivalent to, Osama bin Laden, or Zakiri, or all these different people, the religion of Islam. Interesting enough, Brian says God speaks to Islam as well, and now he's picking on Muslims and comparing them to the conservative view of Jesus. But that's what we believe in. If you believe in the second coming of Christ, that God will bring judgment on a rebellious world, then you are on the same level with Al-Qaeda. I don't know about the humble part, but it seems to have drifted out somewhere in this discussion. Then probably the newest assault that's gotten very popular is William Paul Young's book, The Shack, which I know is an interest with some of you. In there, it's just a cornucopia of potential disasters, but of the many things he says that are most disturbing, God is not interested in judging sin. God is not a God of wrath. He does not judge sin. Sin is its own judgment. He talks about how Christians have looked at the Bible, and he says the most interesting analogy himself. He says you should have a book, or the way we've looked at the Bible is called it gilt, but not G-I-L-T. When he's talking about the lettering or the edging on the Bible, a lot of people have gilt Bibles in this room. If you have a certain type of silver or gold edging, it's gilt edges. He talks about gilt, G-U-I-L-T. That the historic Christian movement, by addressing sin, by addressing the atonement, stuff like that, all we do is induce guilt. And that's a bad thing. And God doesn't care about guilt. Now let me bring this close to home with Rick Warren and some other people like this. I saw a video of Rick Warren in front of I think it's the Davos Economic Conference this last year. Some of the best-known leaders in the world. And they actually asked Rick Warren to come in and speak to them. What an incredible opportunity, right? Here's the leading pastor in the country, in the world perhaps, and he's getting a chance to speak to these economic leaders. And you think he might have a chance to share the gospel, which he used to affirm. No, as you're watching the whole thing, he says the most interesting thing. He's sitting down in front of him. He says, you want to know what God wants for you? You want to know what God expects of you and wants of you? Just be yourselves. That's it. That's all you have to do. That's what God wants. And I'm not shocked anymore because I've heard him say so many other things, but they're not even hiding it anymore. Can you hear the hiss of the snake? Has God really said? Well, it just keeps back and jumping. Apparently God hasn't said these things. Second thing the snake says, the serpent says to the woman, you surely will not die. Well, this is just fun. I was teaching philosophy class recently, and I brought in the Bhagavad Gita because they asked me to teach a section in the philosophy class on Eastern ethics and Eastern thinking. So I said, fine. So I bring in the Bhagavad Gita and some of the Buddhist literatures. And I just basically point out in the class that the world's an illusion. Nobody dies. How simple. I actually think I've done the Gita for you guys. But whether it's Vilmakirti or the Lotus Sutras, all the famous Buddhist literature, all the rest of the Hindu literature, what you find out really quickly is that nobody dies. None of it's real. There are no murderers. There are no murdered. Pretty basic. If you watch the movie The Matrix, you got this worldview. And it's the worldview of Shirley MacLaine and Marianne Williamson and Eckhart Tolle, Oprah's newest best friend of so many just like him. It's the same message. We're not really going to die. It's all an illusion. It's almost like you have an analogy with video games. It's like all of us somehow broke into the cheat codes, and we don't get one life, we get 1 billion lives. We can play the game all day long. And if we accidentally die because we screwed up, it's okay, we got another life. And it's like the kids have taken that seriously, because certainly their parents have. If you take the Gita seriously, and as I point out to the class, there is no more ethics. Because nobody murders, nobody steals, nobody rapes, it's all just a joke. It's all a big play, it's all a story. It has no more impact than watching Star Wars or anything else. In fact, George Lucas from Star Wars endorses that worldview. Funny stuff. Well, how does this work in with our church growth and our emerging church people? Well, since the emerging church movement is really built on the idea that we need to get in touch with the culture, and the culture has become postmodern. What does that mean? Well, most of the people in the emerging church have no idea what it really means because they haven't really read these guys, but I have. That's been part of my dissertation work, is reading Nietzsche and all these different guys, Heidegger and Foucault and Derrida, all these, what a swamp. And I've been reading these guys for a good 8 years now. And the fun thing about reading them and then reading Christians who want to be like them is just amazing to see how it is. Oh, postmoderns are all about community. You cannot read the actual postmoderns and see that. Well, postmodernism is about caring for those who have been left outside. Well, it doesn't say that either. All depends on who you read if you say anything. But one of the things that's really consistent about all the postmodern writers from Nietzsche on down is they all flirted with Buddhism. Almost every one of them. Heidegger flirted with Buddhism. Derrida and Foucault flirted with Buddhism. And one of the fun things about Buddhism is that there is no self. There's no soul. There's no permanent anything. And to use the postmodern language, the postmoderns have deconstructed the self. So what are you? If you don't have a self, if there's nothing that's permanent about you, you're just a pastiche. You're a mural. You're just something put together from different experiences and your language and your culture and what your parents did or didn't do to you and what your friends around you are like. You're just this thing. And so you're just this thing that's been put together in a certain way. You have the freedom to rearrange yourself. So now the kind of surgeries that go down famously down in Trinidad and have for many years, even this idea of male or female, that's just a mural too. That's the pastiche. There's nothing unique about that at all. You can have that changed surgically and you'll be on Oprah Winfrey and famous. All these things are possible now. You can reinvent yourself constantly. You don't have to be what you used to be. You can be free to be anything. So you can change styles faster than anything else. You can change who you are at school. You can just rearrange yourself because there's nothing permanent or real about you. You are just basically this shifting chameleon that shifts whenever it wants to. The irony of that, the postmoderns and the Buddhists have this interesting thinking about this. The real twisted irony is that that's supposedly based on reality. It's real that we're not real. I like that. Think that through. When you realize people at the university have way too much time in their hands, or people in Buddhist monasteries, the reality is that there is no reality. Thank you for sharing that. It's absolutely, it's just a contradiction from every word of the game. So if you can reinvent yourself, then guess what else you're free to reinvent? You're free to reinvent Jesus or your faith. So Brian can reframe in his own language a Jesus who is now a gay-friendly eco-warrior who espouses Karl Marx. And we were actually seeing that with Marxist thinkers about 40 years ago. It's called liberation theology. You can go to a lot of Catholic associations or a lot of universities, and there'd be a picture of Jesus with an AK-47 with a Marxist bandana on. Jesus is Che Guevara. That's great. Comparing him to other mass murderers. Always fun. Or you can have a Jesus that likes you and likes everything about you and doesn't want you to change. You're cool, no matter what. And since you can reinvent Jesus that way, you can also reinvent God the Father that way, which is eventually what Paul Young admits in his book. Then we can image God in any way we are comfortable with. So God the Father comes out as a black woman. I don't care what he calls it. The whole point of what he's saying is that God is freely reimagined by us. We can make up a God as we go. And the most telling thing about this new vision of God is not the black woman, although people have gotten caught in that. The most telling thing is that God does not care about sin. What an amazing thing for God the Father to say. What a wonderful boon to the sinful, rebellious heart. And I heard the same thing from Rick Warren. God doesn't care about your sin. You're not called to repent. Be what you are. Here's the shocking news, Joel Osteen. We are our best lives now? Oh my gosh, that's a nightmare. You mean the best I've got is to be overweight, have my hair fall out completely like it's about to do, and have kids that are in rebellion and all this other stuff, and my car won't start half the time? This is my best life now? Oh, God, shoot me, please. I don't get this. It gets worse. A God who looks suspiciously like me, and I don't mean that in the literal sense, I mean it much worse. A God who is not caring about sin, so therefore he doesn't call me to repent. I love that God. All sinners love that God. A God who suspiciously doesn't know the future, doesn't know what's going to go on 5 minutes from now, doesn't really know what we're thinking now. That's called the open theist movement. That's also in the shack, and there's quite a few other places. A God who, the more you look at it, looks just like us. He doesn't know anything about the future. Oh, he's all powerful, but he never uses it. But he does care a lot, and he cries a lot. Well, that's helpful. I'm glad that God's crying. I would prefer somebody who could do something than somebody who's just going to cry. Not that crying has no place. But I much prefer a God who can change things. And if you read our newsletter this month, what I talked about was how Christmas is an interruption of the pagan mindset, which just sees things in cycles. Nature will just be what it is. It always just goes in cycles. And pagans and Wiccans celebrate those cycles, whether it's Beltane or the spring or winter equinox and all this kind of stuff. Those are their religious rituals, that things will always be the same. Birth, death, rebirth, reincarnation. It's always the same. It just keeps going on over and over and over again. And against that nonsense, Jesus interrupts the cycle and interrupts the pagan world and says, repent. Stop doing what you're doing. You're not just all right the way you are. There are things that are wrong, and you should be so thankful he said that. Even though part of your pagan self says, I don't want God to judge me. I don't want God to make me change. But you should be so thankful he did. Imagine a God as Paul Young imagined it. Imagine a God that does not care about sin. So let's flesh that out. Frankly, we know why Paul Young thinks that way, because he had an affair for many years, and he has to deal with his own situation with God. So the best way for any good lawbreaker to deal with that I've broken the law is to attack the law. Don't address my problems. The law was bad. It's like Chicago politics. Just things being the way they always have been up there. Well, here's the fun thing. Imagine just for a minute a God that does not care about Auschwitz. Go to the Holocaust Museum online and see those pictures there, and imagine a God who's fine with that. Imagine a God who doesn't care about Rwanda or Kampuchea or a zillion other nightmares that we as human beings have invested on our own selves in this planet. And imagine that being okay. Imagine the slaughter of little babies by the millions being okay, which of course is our national policy. And it's about to get much stronger, because many Christians like Brian McLaren and Rob Bell and Doug Pagitt and Tony Jones and Tony Campolo and all these other famous people that Christianity today loves have decided that the slaughter of babies is a non-issue. Why? Because God doesn't really care about those things. He cares about gay marriage, but he does not care in favor of gay marriage, in case you hadn't caught this. But he doesn't care about the slaughter of children. That's called idolatry, folks. We are reinventing, we are reframing whatever language, we are constructing a whole new image of God that is much more user-friendly for 21st century sinners. We like this God. He doesn't say anything we do is wrong. Except for those evangelicals. Those Bible church people, those people are causing the problems. And so as Lonnie was mentioning, we have to do something about that. Well, we'll erect speech codes like they already have in Canada and many parts of Europe and Australia and other places, where if you say that Islam is wrong or homosexuality is a sin or stuff like that, you can be arrested and fined. This is not fairy tale stuff. It's going on right now. And people are trying to introduce that in the U.S. Constitution or into the Congress as well. We live in interesting times. We reimagine Jesus. We reimagine God the Father. And again, it's not the liberals doing this head on. It's from people who call themselves Christians, whose books are sold at Family Bookstore, or who teach at Denver Seminary, Colorado Christian, or Fuller Seminary, nothing, all these other places. Erdman's is one of the most historic Christian publishing houses. They have been around forever. They publish some of the best Christian books ever written. And this last year, they published a book by a Mormon author named Robert Millett, teaches at BYU, called Another Jesus, ? And Richard Mall, the head of Fuller Seminary, which at one time was considered the leading evangelical seminary in America, pronounced Robert Millett a Christian who believes in the same Jesus I do. And Erdman's published this book. We do live in interesting times. You can literally say almost anything except for I believe in the Bible. Amazing times. So let's look at what else the snake says. You will surely not die. God knows when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. You will be like God. Again, for the years I was a missionary to New Age people, it's pretty boring. Everybody's God. Wow, how exciting. Marianne Williamson, I got to hear her speak several times. I've gotten to hear Shirley MacLaine, and most of the big name witches and New Age leaders in the country, I've got to see them. And you hear Deepak Chopra on TV almost every day he's on, or somebody else is on The View, or he's on Larry King, seems like every week. And at the bottom line, we're all God. It's all wonderful. All this kind of stuff. And a couple of weeks ago, Deepak Chopra was on after the massacre in Mumbai, or Bombay, India, where Muslims did what Muslims do. And he was on blaming George Bush for this. And I was just fascinated. One, he's an Advaita Vedanta Hindu. He doesn't believe it happened. But he won't be honest about that. They may not have him back on TV. And then he blames somebody else for what Muslims were doing this 1,300 years ago. What the heck does George Bush have to do with anything? It's just it's almost pathological, the lies we'll tell and we'll believe in this culture. I don't care what you think of George Bush. But Muslims have been doing this long before George Bush, and as we're about to find out, Muslims will be doing this after George Bush. Because that's what Muslims are and what they do. It's what they've always done. But here's the Advaita Vedanta Hindu who had about, how many people killed? 180 people or something like this? Of his countrymen killed, and he's blaming somebody in a far away place. But if he takes his own thoughts seriously, if he reads his Gita, which he claims to believe in, the Bhagavad Gita, then he should find out that, by the way, nobody died. He should go on Larry King and say, Larry, no sweat, it's cool. We're all gods anyways. No, it's Deepak Chopra. He's a Hindu. He's supposed to say things like that. But when you read Rob Bell, and you read Doug Paget, and these other so-called evangelical Christians, and you hear them talking about the divine in every person, and you start going, whoa. When you see them doing Hindu teachings or Hindu practices like yoga and Buddhist chants, you go, isn't something out of picture here? When you hear Spencer Burke, most of you don't know who he is. He runs the most famous emerging website called The Ooze, been on for many years. When you hear him basically talk about the fact that he's a panentheist, that God is literally in everything, then the snake hisses as loud as it ever has. These are people who call themselves Christians, who are in the evangelical churches in our country, and who are saying, oh, by the way, the Hindus were right. We really do have God in everything. So God was the Nazis slaughtering God as the Jews in Auschwitz. That makes sense. I asked that to a Jewish lady Mark and I were talking to at the Psyche Fair many years ago. I grew up with Jewish kids. And how Jewish kids can get into the New Age, which they have by, it's a huge thing. They call them Jew-boos. It's so popular for Jewish people since World War II to get in some version of the New Age movement. Marianne Williamson's Jewish, and some of the other prominent Jewish or New Age writers. And this young girl comes up and she wants us to do this fortune teller thing, and I find out who she is. And I asked her, I said, so you believe God's in everything? Oh, yes, you're there. I said, so was that just God killing God at Auschwitz? Now, you can believe a lot of things, but it's hard to imagine a Jewish person taking seriously that the slaughter of millions of her people is just an illusion, and that it's okay. But that's the conclusion you come to if you take seriously the idea that God's in everything and everyone. So this is just God killing God. And she literally took a step back and was done with us. And our hope and prayer is that she thinks that one through and what it is to say that type of thing. I actually sent a letter many years ago to Ram Dass, who was born Richard Alberts, another Jewish fellow who was a professor at Harvard, was doing the LSD experiments with Timothy Leary. Some of you are old enough to remember that. Goes off to India, comes back as Ram Dass, one of the early New Age gurus, and writes a book called Be Here Now. And then several years ago, he had a stroke. I'd heard him speak a couple times, and he's absolutely incoherent. He cannot make sense, and this is before the stroke. Okay? So I'm serious. My wife and I went and saw him in Boulder many years ago. It was one of the few times I could drag her to a meeting. And he would start a sentence and stop in mid-sentence. And just stop with a smile on his face. And, well, of course, this is Boulder. But, I mean, the stupider it got, the more profound, apparently, it became. It was an amazing night. And it was hard to imagine. Terry's just not quite getting into this whole thing. What the heck's going on? I mean, the more stupid he was, the more the crowd seemed to love it. And so when I heard in New Age Journal, I read this, I got the magazine, and I read that he'd had a stroke. I wrote him a letter. And they were asking for money to pay for his medical bills, which I thought was interesting on another level alone. So I wrote him a letter and actually sent him a check. And I said, I've read, Ron, I've read your books. I listened to you speak. I understand what you're saying, that you believe you are God, that all of this is God, and that this entire outward world is just an illusion, like the Bhagavad Gita says. But yet here you are, sick with a stroke, and in serious financial crisis. What kind of God chooses that for himself? Who would willingly choose any of this kind of stuff that goes on in this world if we were really in charge like we want to pretend we are? It's a great book that came out in youth ministry many years ago when I was a youth pastor. It was written for middle school kids, and I always loved it. But I have a New Age analogy to it. And the title of the book was, So If God Loves Me, Why Can't I Open My Locker? I thought that's a great middle school way of looking at life. Kind of a sort of younger version of the problem of evil. But let's translate that into the New Age worldview. So if I'm God, why do I have MS? Why do we have cancer? Why is there AIDS? Why are we slaughtering each other in all these places all over the world? Who chooses that for themselves? What kind of sick God would want that for itself? That's where Ram Dass was, and I challenged him on that point. And I said, maybe you should return to the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who came into this world in the person of Yeshua. And I basically appealed to his Jewish faith. I did not get a letter back, but they did cash my check. Isn't that interesting? Funny how that all worked. What you see over and over again in the Word Faith movement that's on TV every single night is people who call themselves gods. And you hear the Buddhists calling themselves gods. And you hear Roman Catholic scholars who are meditating with Buddhists, and now my seminary profs are down there meditating with Buddhists as well. You hear Richard Rohr and Brian McLaren. Richard Rohr is a famous Catholic monk who runs an institute down in Santa Fe, and professors from all over Denver. University of Denver, Denver Seminary, and others go down to meditate with the Benedictine order while they're meditating with the Theravada Buddhist monks. And they're all discovering, hey, it's all the same thing. We're all one. Wonderful. We're all God and we're all one. The snake's hiss is heard louder and louder. You will not die. You will be as God. And finally the snake says, knowing good and evil. Well, this is fun. What does that mean? Well, I can tell you what they think it means. And I remember reading Barbara Marx Hubbard, very famous New Ager, who wrote about how she was, by the way, second choice for Democratic Vice President in 1984, one of the lead futurists in the world. She speaks all over the world to gigantic corporations and everything else. And in her book, what is it called? The Hunger of Eve. It's an autobiography of how she came out of her Christian background that she was raised in, got out of her marriage and her children situation because that was old and tired, and she wanted to have sex with other people. So there's two tracks to this book, and as she's turning it from Christianity to the New Age, she's also leaving her husband behind and having affairs with people. And by the end, she's come out and it's all good. She's God and affairs are meaningless. They don't matter. It's all an illusion anyway, so do what you want. So in the heart of her book, The Hunger of Eve, there's a cover that has an apple with a bite out of it. And inside that bite, you can see the universe. And the point is that Jehovah is the bad guy of the Genesis story. Remember, we're about reframing or reimagining. Why is the Jehovah bad guy? Because he wanted us to not know that we're gods ourselves. He was jealous of us. He didn't want us to discover our own inner godhood, our own inner divinity. So he kept us from that. Well, guess who the good guy is? The snake. Lucifer's the good guy of the story, according to Barbara Marx, because he wanted us to discover our full human potentiality and all the rest of this kind of language. So the snake tells a wonderful story. You'll be his God. You'll know good and evil. So what do they mean by this phrase? Barbara's very clear about this. Because each of us are divine, each of us determines what's right for us. And nobody has the right to say we're wrong. Welcome to America. Welcome to affective education present in most public schools. Each person decides for themselves what's right and wrong. This is gospel for young people, folks. You cannot listen to music, you cannot watch the movies or half the shows on TV, especially the Disney Channel and some of these, without hearing this message come up over and over and again. You get to decide for yourself. And no one, parents, school, government, church, or anybody can tell you you're right or wrong. Well, the witches love this. I mean, this is just literally near and dear to the heart of every witch I've ever talked to. We get to choose for ourselves what's right, and no one can tell us we're wrong. Which eventually comes out to, we get to have sex with anybody we want to, and nobody can tell us it's wrong. And so we turn around and we look at this abortion thing, and we look at this HIV thing, and all the other STDs, and we can't imagine what's going wrong. Aren't we just doing what we're supposed to do our own thing, and not let anybody tell us what's wrong? Didn't Bobby Brown say it well? It's my prerogative. I can do what I want to do. Or John Lennon in my generation, whatever gets you through the night, it's all right. Or 1,000 other versions of the exact same thing. You get to decide what's right. You get to decide what's wrong. And no one sits in judgment. And now we have come completely full circle. And we found out, most importantly of all, that this God that Christians have held on to, he doesn't sit in judgment either. It's all okay. Nothing you do bothers him. So Rick Warren or Joel Osteen can basically talk about, we don't talk about a God of wrath. We don't talk about a God who judges. Everything's okay. Just be what you already are. Frankly, that thought, again, it ought to terrify you, because it sure as heck terrifies me. I'm looking around the room. I know many of you. Some of you are nice people. Lonnie, Mark, a few others are maybe not quite on the nice list. And Christmas is coming. That ought to be critical for them to start at least faking like they're nice, okay? Reinvent themselves as nice people. Reimagine themselves. Of course, then they have to fool you guys, too, if they've self-deceived themselves, and then they have to get the rest of you to go along with it. We can call ourselves good and call ourselves God all day long, and all we have to do is look at the internet for, 30 seconds? All we have to do is go out in the world for just a minute or two, and what do we see? Murder, rape, lying, stealing, and that's just daily Chicago politics again. But that is all over our world. How is it we can deceive ourselves most of all? Well, that's what the snake does, folks. He's a good deceiver. Why is he a good deceiver? Because we are bad listeners when it comes to listening to God. When the snake entices us, we're all here. We won't die? Cool. We get to make our own decisions and nobody can tell us we're wrong. Wonderful. We love that lie. But when God tells us something is true, we're in rebellion. That's our pagan souls. And this is why it's so critical to get the antidote. I could go on with the bad stuff all day long, but that'll depress everybody more than they already are. So turn to John 17, and let's look at somebody who gave the truth. I sent an email to a bunch of pastors this morning about an article I read from Al Mohler this last week. Al Mohler is the president of Southern Seminary, a very gifted thinker and writer, somebody I really respected. And he wrote an article on Friday that talked about one who spoke with authority, referring to Jesus, how the scribes and Pharisees and the crowds were amazed at this guy. Because he wasn't doing the thing that everybody was doing, that you hear so much out of Brian McLaren and Rob Bell and all these guys. Well, everybody's right and everybody's okay. That's the way the rabbis always taught. Well, Rabbi so-and-so says this on the one hand, and Rabbi so-and-so says this on the other hand. If you watch Fiddler on the Roof, one of my favorite movies, you will see the main character doing that. Well, on the one hand, on the other hand, that's rabbinic tradition. That goes back thousands of years because they quit hearing God. And so we had to listen to all the men, and we don't want to elevate them, so we'll just have different camps. And we have the old joke, I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood in Los Angeles, the old joke was, wherever there's 3 Jews, there's 5 opinions. And it's always this back and forth equivocation. Always. So in comes Jesus into that kind of mix. And he says, you have heard it was said, but I tell you. And he says it repeatedly. How arrogant of him. Didn't he get the Brian McLaren memo about epistemic humility? How dare he assume that certain things are right and certain things are wrong? And that they don't change because we change. Because we have a different opinion than we did 5 years ago or 30 years ago. They're just the way they are because this is what God says. How dare Jesus presume all this? So Jesus comes in and he speaks as if he had authority. And the people are stunned. And a lot of people were mad. And I'm inviting you today to teach with authority. And to share the gospel with authority. Because while it will offend, it's guaranteed it will offend. I just promise you that. It also reaches people. There are a lot of cults out there who don't play the postmodern game. You know what they do? Oh, God spoke to me in the kitchen last night, and it's true, and this is for you. And people, okay. Because they're so tired of the equivocating our culture gives us. So be people who speak with authority. I loved what Al Mohler was saying at the commencement message at the seminary there. Well, think of that in terms of what Jesus himself is saying. This is John chapter 17. Verse 13 and following, but now I come to you, and these things I speak in the world, so that you may have my joy made full in themselves. I have given them your word. Jesus talking to the Father, talking about the disciples. They have his word. And the world has hated them. Oh, no. Dan Campbell, one of the emerging church leaders, comes out with a book. I know I talked about this last time I was here, but remember this. Called They Like Jesus, But Don't Like the Church. I think that's the exact wording of it. Where he says, you know what? Christians are anti-gay and they're anti-abortion and they're anti always leading to God, and that means people don't like them, but they love Jesus. No, they don't. They love the emerging, emasculated, deconstructed, reconstructed, reimagined Jesus, the Jesus of Brian McLaren's fairy tales, but they don't love the Jesus of the Bible because they don't read it. And if they read it, they rebel. They turn against it. How dare Jesus say that? Jesus says you shouldn't judge. Jesus said that when you judge rightly, not as a hypocrite. Jesus says deal with your own issues first before you try to deal with somebody else's. He never tells you not to judge. But they miscast it. Because we do it for them, folks. We taught them that. I do not ask you to keep them out of the world, but to keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world. And here's McLaren and Rob Bell and all this. Yes, we are. We're just like the world. And folks, they're right. We are. Look at the Christian churches. Look how not different we are from our friends. We divorce at the same rate. We hook up. We live together at the same rate. Our Christian kids are doing drugs, not quite at the same rate. But boy, that's something to be happy about, huh? We're not quite as bad as the rest of our culture when it comes to some things, but we're right there with so many other things. We read the same books, we watch the same shows, we listen to the same music. We are basically them. And McLaren is celebrating that fact, that we're just like our culture. They are not of the world, Jesus talks about his disciples, even as I am not of the world. So the reconstruct Jesus as the Marxist, as the friendly echo warrior, miscast. And then here's the key line. Sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth. Now here's a wonderful thing. A little logic, a little syllogism for you. Syllogism is a type of argument. Don't get lost on the word, please. It's real simple if you took it, which we don't. But if you were to take a logic class, which, by the way, we're offering critical thinking this spring, which is a logic class. But one of the oldest syllogisms in the Western world is, all men are mortal, Socrates is mortal. Conclusion from the two premises, all men are mortal, Socrates is mortal. Socrates is a man. Socrates is mortal. Real simple, right? Just logic. Look at what Jesus says. Sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth. Set them apart. Make them different. Make them holy in the truth. Your word is truth. Is Jesus inventing something new? No. He's saying what the Word of God has always said. That we're just like weeds. We grow up for a while, but God's Word is eternal. It is always true. It never will change. We don't get to recast it, reimagine it, reframe it, construct it in our own, according to ourselves, be good little idol makers. If you want to be separate from this world, if you want to be different, you want to be one of Christ's disciples, then it's real simple. Be sanctified or set apart by God's Word. And there is no way of doing that separate from you being involved in God's Word. Paul later says this, and the emerging people hate Paul with a passion. They're as bad as the Muslims who have always hated Paul, and the liberals who have always hated Paul. But later on, Paul says to his young student he's teaching, Timothy, he says, the Scripture is inspired by God. It's breathed out by God. And all of it is breathed out by God. And therefore, because it all comes from God, it is profitable for rebuke, for correction, for discipline, for godliness, for holiness, to separate us, to make us different. If we want to know why our American churches are so anemic and our American Christian lives are so anemic, there it is. We're recasting God. We're reimagining God, and we're not listening to Him. So he says we must be sanctified in His truth, in His Word. If you want to be different, do you listen to Brian McLaren? Why would you get different? Isn't Brian just like all the others? Isn't that his whole point, that we're being like the others? Kind of an ironic thing that he's seen as an iconoclast. He's different. He's different than the whole church world. No, he's not. He's exactly what was coming out of Germany 150 years ago. What comes out of Iliff Seminary now. He very much fits in with our world. That's why he's not a disciple of Christ. If you want to be a disciple of Christ, you will be sanctified or set apart by God's Word and what is true. Why am I interested in this Bible college? Because it is learning who God is that literally changed my life. That started me on a process that's not done today. About making me different than what I once was. I can't imagine listening to Joel Osteen in 1972. You're your best life. Well, that would explain all the arrests and the drugs and the wanting to kill my stepdad. Yeah, this is working out well. Thank you for that thought. And I'm God. I chose this path for myself. I chose to have my parents rip our family apart, my stepdad come up and beat me up, and all the other wonderful things, and have my stepsister sleep with the entire neighborhood, and all the joy that went on in my family. We're our best life now. Like I said, God, shoot me if that's the best we got. What a nightmare statement. Can you imagine that being said in Manila, in Smoky Mountain, or Dachau, or Rwanda, or any place else? Hey, you're all God. You wanted this. You chose this. You're your best life now. What a farce. It's a farce here, and it's a bigger farce everywhere else in this world. Thankfully, it's not what the Lord says. The Lord says, repent. It says, turn. The first words out of John the Baptist's mouth publicly was repent. Interesting enough, the next chapter, Jesus comes along. What's the first word out of his mouth publicly? Repent. Turn away from what you were doing. Stop. You're not okay. And those of us who are honest look in the mirror and say, we know we're not okay. And I'm thankful that God, by His mercy and grace, calls us to that. But it was Christian education that taught me this. Let me help you understand. If you haven't heard my testimony, some of you maybe have, but I was not a formal atheist. I hadn't thought through that deeply anything. Too busy doing drugs and chasing skirts and all the fun things. That was such a good life. And I thought God was an angry, bitter old man. That's how I pictured God. And every time I got busted by the cops or my stepdad beat me up or something like this is just God getting back at me for all the things I hadn't been caught at yet. That was my image of God. So I say I was a believer. And along comes Hal Lindsey's book, The Late Great Planet Earth. And for what everyone thinks of Hal Lindsey's adventures ever since that book, but the reality is that he brought the gospel into the story of Israel, which got my attention because I grew up with all these Jewish kids. And in there, as he's got my attention about the Bible, and I read about the fact that it says that Israel will be destroyed and brought back together, and that wasn't pie in the sky stuff, but it actually happened in this world, and it was real, and you could grab it and you could see it. And then he introduces me to who God really is, and it says this, my favorite verse, Romans 5:8, but God proves, demonstrates, shows His love in this. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for the ungodly. He didn't die for the good people. He died for the sinners, the screw-ups, the messes, the hardcore rebels. Wow. That was life-changing. In other words, it was an idea about who this God is that changed my life. And I don't want this to sound over-academic, but you cannot get into irrationality as the mystical Catholic Church proved to us, and to see all these Christian leaders running down to meditate and lose their minds is an amazing, terrible, sad thing to me. Because it is the ideas that God taught us. When He taught us that He is love. And He is not hate. He is light. And He is not darkness. Those are real ideas. You know those are in opposition to other ideas? If you read the Bhagavad Gita or all the other Buddhist and Hindu literature, what we hear, that God encompasses all. He's both light and darkness, love and hate, good and evil. It's all mixed together. That's what the yin-yang is supposed to teach you of Taoism formally. But it's the same as all Eastern religion. God comprises all things. That's a set of ideas. It's a set of ideas with horrifying consequences. You can kill anybody, as the Gita points out, but don't worry about it. Nobody ever dies. That is opposed by a different idea. You shall not murder. And murders do not inherit the kingdom of heaven. And God is not interested in murderers inheriting the kingdom of heaven. Nor homosexuals or thieves or braggarts or liars, the whole grocery list. And I'm guilty of all, and I have to say, God, show me mercy. And on the cross of Jesus Christ, He did. That's what's most interesting about the shack when you find out about God who doesn't judge, is that the cross is basically out of the picture there. It's irrelevant. That's what's interesting about the contemplative prayer movement that's so hot in Protestant circles now, that my seminary's all over. The cross is irrelevant to your union with God. You can become one with God, and the cross kind of fades out, just as it did with the medieval Catholics. The cross became, it's there. We just ignore it. Well, to me, it made a huge impact that God loved me, and He proved that to me on the cross. These are about ideas. We live in a culture and in a larger world that is full with ideas, some of them good and a lot of them bad. Because the snake's lies are all over the place, and they haven't changed. You'll be a God. There's Oprah's audience. We love being God. We can't do what we think we can, but we love calling ourselves that. Apparently it still sells well. Why is Horizon College of Denver important? Because it is a battle of ideas. And God has told us that if we want to be set apart, we must be in His Word. We must know. And the thing that happened when I got saved, I knew nothing. I hadn't grown up in a church of any sort. And my youth pastor said, you should take a year of Bible college and really learn. And I came home with that new message from my parents. They were so mad I'd become a Christian. It was better when I was going to jail, apparently. That was all right. But the Christian part was very disturbing. And so then they said I'm going to go to Bible college. My dad says, fine, takes my car away. Can't have any of that. I should go do something respectable, like become a lawyer, be in politics. There is an honest profession. But because I went to Bible college, I was very upsetting to my family. But I'll tell you this, it turned my life inside out, because I got literally a crash course on what does God say. And it was taught by people who believed that God said it. And they spoke with authority. And it changed my life. And it turned me inside out. And it told me about what the snake said and how these are lies. And all I had to do was look at reality and look what the snake said and how that matches up with sin and evil. And I go, they're not telling me a falsehood. Jesus spoke with authority because He spoke with truth. And we're losing that in our Christian churches. And Horizon College doesn't pretend to be the only vehicle for that kind of training and knowledge. But we do believe we want to be one of the vehicles that God uses to bring about that training and knowledge in God's people. If we do not get sanctified by His Word and His truth, we will be idol makers. We'll buy the next version of the shack that comes out in 2 years, or the next version of The Secret, or the next version of Eckhart Tolle, or whatever, because that's what's happening in our culture. We're watching Christians mull over for this stuff right and left. So in contrast, my appeal to you is that I am passionate that God can turn your Christian life inside out, because you can be sanctified in His Word. You can learn His Word from people who care about it. We have a group of teachers. And here's the fun thing. Lonnie didn't mention this, but something that Chris told us, who's the administrative dean down there in Horizon College, San Diego. He says, you guys have a better group of teachers than we do. We have a group of great guys who love God's Word, who believe in God's Word, who realize how critical a moment this is for the Christian church in America. That we must be in the business of understanding, learning, studying God's Word. So my appeal to you this morning is, you're going to get it. You can get it fast. You can get it slow. But you must, if you are serious about following Jesus Christ, if you do not want to fall back in the same old routine of what you've always been, then you must be set apart. And the only way you can be set apart is to be invested in your life in God's Word and truth. And that is not from the snake. That's the thing he hates the most, is that you'll listen to God instead of him. Let's pray to our Father. Father, thanks for mercy and grace. Thanks for turning my life. I pray for people here who need your word, Father. Some who have never believed you before, that you grab their heart to stay. Father, I pray for those who've rebelled and turned away, that you'd restore them, Father. And one of the most exciting things about what I talked about this morning is not just that you are serious about sin, which is good, but you're serious about mercy and grace too. And if we turn from our sin, you're always willing to accept us back. Father, for those who need to repent this morning, grab them as well. For all of us, Father, as we've listened to the snake's hiss, and we've listened to the rattle all these thousands of years later, forgive us. Please, as Jesus prayed, Father, please sanctify us. Please make us different. Please, I pray that the Holy Spirit would change all of us this day. We pray this all in the name of our blessed Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.